The phone rang at 6:47 in the morning, and by the time Marvin hung up, I knew our whole life had changed. I heard him say, 250 million, twice, like he needed to hear it out loud to believe it himself. I was standing at the stove with a spatula in my hand, and I watched my husband of 26 years drop into the kitchen chair like his knees had given out on him. My name is Charlotta. I'd been married to Marvin since I was 28 years old, and in all that time, I never once saw him look the way he looked that morning. Like a man who'd been handed the rest of his life on a silver tray. He didn't hug me first. He called his brother, then his attorney, then a man named Marchand, who I hadn't heard of before that day. I stood there flipping eggs, smiling, genuinely happy for him, because that's what 26 years does to you. It makes another person's win feel like your own. He never once asked what I did all day at my own job. Never asked what a title like mine even meant. I was just corporate something to him, the way I'd always been, and I let it stay that way because he never seemed to want more than that. By the time he came home that evening, something had shifted in him. He walked in different. Taller, maybe. Colder, definitely. He didn't kiss me hello. He set his keys down hard on the counter and looked at me like he was seeing the kitchen for the first time and didn't like the furniture. "We need to talk," he said. I turned the stove off and gave him my full attention, because that's what a wife does. "I've been thinking a lot," he said, not looking at me directly. "About energy. About what kind of energy a man needs around him when he's about to step into something big." I didn't say anything yet. I just watched him find his words the way a man does when he's rehearsed them in the car. "Your energy's been heavy, Charlotta. Real heavy. And I can't have that around me right now. Not with what's coming. Before I go further, if you're watching this, drop where you're tuning in from tonight. I'd love to know." I asked him what he meant. Calm. Because 26 years teaches you not to raise your voice first. "I mean, I can't live with your bad energy anymore," he said. "I need you to go." He said it plain, like he was reading it off a card. No shake in his voice, no hesitation. 26 years. And he said it the way a man cancels a subscription. I didn't cry. I didn't ask him to repeat himself. Something in me had already started packing before my hands caught up to it. I went upstairs and folded my clothes into 2 suitcases while he sat downstairs on the phone again, already back to talking numbers, already back to the deal. Like the conversation we'd just had was a chore he'd checked off a list. I didn't slam a single drawer. I didn't leave a note. I carried my bags down the stairs past him, and he didn't get up to help me, didn't get up to stop me, didn't get up at all. I backed out of the driveway I'd pulled into every day for over 2 decades, and in my rearview mirror, I watched a car I didn't recognize turn onto our street, slow down, and pull in behind me like it had been waiting for me to leave. Luvenia opened her door before I even knocked, like she'd been standing there waiting on a feeling she couldn't name. Charlotta. Just my name. Flat. Taking in the suitcase in my hand and the look on my face. She didn't ask what happened. She stepped back and let me in. I sat on her couch and told her plain, no crying, no shaking, that Marvin had put me out, said my energy was heavy, said he needed me gone before whatever was coming for him got here. Luvenia's face went through about 4 different emotions before she settled on angry. "He said what to you?" I repeated it, calm as I'd said it the first time. 26 years of marriage teaches you how to carry hard news without dropping it on the floor in front of people. "That man has lost his mind," she said, already pacing. 26 years, Charlotta. 26 years, and he just... She stopped herself, looked at me like she expected me to fall apart, and got frustrated when I didn't. "You need to call somebody," she said. "Tonight. You need to do something." "I will," I told her, Not eventually. Tonight. I didn't argue with her, but I didn't rush either. There's a difference between moving slow because you're broken and moving slow because you're thinking. Luvenia didn't know which one she was looking at yet. Around 4 that afternoon, my phone buzzed. A neighbor from our old street, somebody who'd known Marvin and me for years, sending a photo without a single word attached. A moving truck in our driveway. Boxes. A woman I didn't recognize directing 2 men where to carry a mattress. Luvenia looked over my shoulder at the screen and went quiet in a different way than before. Quiet, like something had confirmed itself in her mind. Same day, she said. He didn't even wait a week. I looked at the photo a long moment, not at the boxes, at the woman's face, half turned toward the camera, laughing at something one of the movers said. She looked comfortable, like she'd been planning her arrival longer than I'd known about my own leaving. I put the phone face down on the coffee table. "You're not even going to say anything?" Luvenia asked. "What is there to say?" "Charlotta." "I heard you the first time," I said, gentle but final enough that she let it drop. That night, after Luvenia went to bed, I sat at her kitchen table with the lights off and my phone lit up in front of me. I found the number for an attorney a co-worker had mentioned once, years back. In passing, the kind of name you file away without thinking you'll ever need it. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounded surprised to be getting a call that late, but didn't rush me off the line once I explained who I was and what I needed. "I can have a petition drafted inside 48 hours, he said. "That part's fast. The part you need to think about is service. Getting it into his hands the right way, at the right time. That takes more planning than people expect." I sat with that a moment, turning it over. "Take whatever time you need to plan it right," I told him. "I'm not in a hurry to be sloppy." He said he'd be in touch. I hung up, and for the first time since that morning, I didn't feel like a woman who'd been thrown away. I felt like a woman who'd just started paying attention. 2 days after I left, Luvenia decided she wasn't going to sit still anymore. She didn't tell me she was going over there. I found out after, the way I found out most things that week. Secondhand, pieced together, always a little later than I would have liked. She drove to the house uninvited, sat in her car outside for a few minutes gathering herself, and knocked like she had every right to be there. Because she did. Marvin opened the door already irritated, like he knew what kind of conversation was coming before she said a word. "I'm not here to fight with you," she told him. "I just want to understand what's going on." "There's nothing to understand," he said. "I made a decision. Grown people make decisions." She told me his voice had that hard edge to it, the one he used when he already knew he was wrong and needed you to back off before you proved it. She didn't back off. While they stood in the doorway, she said Trisha appeared behind him, pleasant, smiling, asking if Luvenia wanted to come in for a minute. Luvenia said no. Trisha didn't push it, just lingered a beat, then asked Marvin, easy and light, what time he needed to leave for his meeting in the morning, whether he'd already picked out what he was wearing, whether the trip after would be a long one. Nothing about the deal itself. Nothing that would raise an eyebrow on its own. Just a woman asking about her man's schedule, the kind of question anybody might ask. But Luvenia said it sat wrong in her stomach anyway. Said Trisha's eyes moved to her when she asked it, like she wanted Luvenia to hear the question land. Casual on the surface, but timed. Before she left the porch, Luvenia noticed something small she almost didn't mention. A leather folder sitting on the entry table by the door, the kind used for paperwork. A pen resting on top of it like somebody had been signing something not long before she knocked. She didn't get a look at what was inside, just enough of a glance to register that it was there at all. in a house barely settled, in the hands of two people who hadn't known each other long enough, by her count, to already have paperwork of their own. Maybe I'm reaching, Luvania told me later. Maybe it's nothing. Marvin, for his part, told his sister she needed to mind her business. Said she'd never liked anybody he brought around. Said she was probably jealous he'd finally found some peace. Luvania said she almost laughed at that. Peace wasn't the word she'd use for a house that suddenly had somebody else's things sitting in it. She left without getting anything solid. No proof, no smoking gun, nothing she could point to and say, "Here, look at this." Just a feeling she couldn't shake, sitting in her car outside his house before she pulled off. She called me that evening. "I don't have anything to tell you," she said first, like she needed to warn me before she started. Something about her asking after his schedule like that. And there was some kind of folder on the table, papers, a pen just sitting there. I don't know. It probably means nothing. I listened without saying much. I didn't tell her what I already knew about how these things usually go, didn't tell her anything about the attorney or the papers being drafted. That wasn't hers to carry yet. "You did the right thing checking on him," I told her. "He wouldn't hear it from me even if I did have something," she said. "I know." She sighed, tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. "Just be careful, okay? Whatever you're doing, just be careful." I told her I would be. I didn't tell her I already was. 3 days after Luvania's phone call, I sat across from Winston in his office with a folder between us that had my name on it in print, dated back 8 months. Winston had been our firm's general counsel longer than I'd worked in business development, and he had a way of laying documents on the table like he was dealing cards he already knew the outcome of. "I want to walk through this before we get any closer to closing," he said, sliding the folder toward me. "Standard procedure. Anything related party gets reconfirmed before signing." I opened it, and there it was. My own handwriting, my own signature, from the week Marvin's company had first been shortlisted for the contract. 8 months old. Filed the same week Marvin came home talking about a bid he thought was a long shot, never once knowing I was the one who'd put his name in front of the committee in the first place. "Everything still accurate?" Winston asked. "Everything's the same," I said. "Nothing's changed but the ending of my marriage." He didn't react to that the way most people would have. He just nodded, made a note, moved on. That was the thing about Winston. He respected a woman who could say something painful in a flat voice and not need comforting for it. A younger associate, one I didn't know well, sat in on the review, taking notes. Partway through, she looked up from her legal pad. "Has the related party, the husband, ever been personally informed of the disclosure?" she asked, not unkindly, just doing her job. "Disclosure to the firm satisfies the requirement," Winston said, without hesitation. "Personal notice to a spouse isn't part of our policy. Never has been." The associate nodded and wrote that down like it was nothing more than a line in a manual. I sat there and let the weight of it settle over me, quiet and slow. 8 months. Marvin had walked around all this time thinking the deal fell into his lap because he was good at what he did. And he was good at what he did. I never took that from him. But he never knew there was a piece of paper sitting in a firm's permanent record with my name attached, filed before he even knew he'd won anything. Filed before the bad energy conversation. Filed before another woman's boxes ever touched our driveway. There was a kind of power in that I hadn't expected to feel. Not loud, not vengeful, just steady. The paperwork had already done its job months before he ever raised his voice at me. It didn't need me to say anything, didn't need me to explain myself to anybody. It had just been sitting there the whole time, patient, doing exactly what it was filed to do. Winston closed the folder and looked at me over his glasses. One more thing, he said. Given the size of this deal, institutional policy requires an in-person recertification signature from any disclosed related party at the actual closing. That's not optional. That means you'll need to be in the room that day. I sat with that for a moment, turning it over slow. In the room? I repeated. In the room? He said. Same table, same signing. I nodded once, steady, and didn't ask him anything further. My son found out from his aunt, not from his father, and not from me. Luvania told him without meaning to, a slip in the middle of another conversation, mentioning she'd been by to see about his father, and Marquise called her back within the hour asking what she meant. I wasn't there for any of it, but Marquise told me all of it later, word for word, the way children do when something's eating at them and they need to hand it to somebody else to hold for a while. He drove out there that same evening, not to start anything, just needing to see it with his own eyes. Marvin opened the door surprised, then irritated at being surprised. You couldn't call first, Marvin asked him. Would you have told me the truth if I did? Marvin didn't answer that. He let him in anyway. Marquis said there were already signs somebody new had settled in. Things out of place, things that weren't Mama's. Nothing that looked quite like it belonged where it was sitting. Trisha came out from the kitchen wiping her hands on a towel, smiling wide, too wide. The kind of smile that's working hard to be liked. You must be Marquise, she said, like she'd been waiting to say his name. I've heard so much about you. He told me he almost laughed at that because he doubted she'd heard anything real. He shook her hand because his manners wouldn't let him do otherwise, and she held on a beat longer than the handshake needed, asking him questions fast. What he did for work, whether he had a girlfriend, whether he liked football. Stacking one question on top of the next before he could finish answering the first. He said it felt like being interviewed for a part in something he hadn't agreed to audition for. Marvin sat in his recliner watching the whole thing, pleased, like he was showing off a new car and waiting for his son to admire it. Marquis finally asked him straight out, How's Mama doing? Where'd she end up? Marvin's face changed, just slightly. Your mother's fine. She's staying with Luvania. That's it? That's all you've got to say about it? What do you want me to say, Marquise? Grown folks make grown decisions. Marquis said he heard that same phrase Luvania had already told him about, word for word, like Marvin had rehearsed a line and was proud of how it sounded coming out. He didn't stay long after that. Said his goodbyes, hugged his father stiff, let Trisha hug him too because refusing would have made more of a scene than he wanted, and got back in his car and sat in the driveway a minute before he could make himself pull off. He called me on the drive home. Mama, I don't like it over there. Something's off. I don't know what, but something's off. I listened to him carefully, my chest tight in a way I didn't let into my voice. Are you okay? He asked. Really okay. I opened my mouth to tell him everything. The disclosure, the attorney, the closing date circled on a calendar, and stopped myself right at the edge of it. I'm all right, baby, I said instead. Not yet. Just, not yet. Winston called me into his office on a Tuesday, and before he said a word, I could tell from the set of his shoulders that this wasn't going to be a 5-minute conversation. Marvin's attorney started his title work, he said. Man named Marshawn Alsobrook. Requested standard documentation from our end yesterday. I sat down slow, keeping my face even. And my office sent him the standard package. Nothing cross-referenced. That's not unusual at this stage. Full compliance review doesn't happen until closer to signing. Every firm does it the same way. Nobody's hiding anything, it's just not time yet. I understood that better than most, having sat on the other side of 100 deals just like it. Early requests get early documents. The deeper files, the disclosures, the things that actually matter. Those come out when a deal is close enough to real that everybody starts double-checking their own work. How close is close? I asked. Winston slid a printed calendar across his desk, one date circled in red. That's the other thing. Closing got moved up. I looked at the date and felt something settle low in my stomach, though I kept my hand still on the arm of the chair. Moved up from when? 2 weeks out. Now it's landing exactly 3 days from this Thursday. 3 days from Thursday. I did the math without meaning to. The same week Winston had just told me I'd be required in that room for the recertification signature. The same week my attorney was still working out the timing for service. Everything I'd been keeping in separate boxes in my mind was about to occupy the same 3 days, whether I was ready for that or not. Why the change? I asked. Investor pressure, from what I understand. They want it closed before the next fiscal quarter opens. Nothing to do with us. He paused. You all right? I'm fine, I said, and mostly meant it. Winston studied me a moment longer than the question needed. He'd worked with me 14 years. He knew the difference between fine and the version of fine I gave people when I didn't want to explain myself. I just want you prepared, he said. Once also Brooke does his full cross-reference closer to closing, he's going to see the disclosure. There's no version of this where he doesn't see it. I know. I mean it, Charlotta. Once he sees it, he's going to have questions, and he's going to bring those questions straight to his client. I nodded slowly, turning the calendar back toward him. Then let him have his questions. Winston didn't push further. He'd known me long enough to recognize when a woman had already made her peace with something before it happened, and he respected that peace enough not to poke at it. I walked back to my own office and sat behind my desk a long while, staring at nothing, doing the same math over and over. 3 days from Thursday, the same week, everything converging, whether I'd planned it that tightly or not. I didn't know yet exactly how those 3 days would unfold. I only knew, sitting there, that the ground under all of us had just shifted, quiet and unannounced, the way ground does right before something finally gives way. My attorney called me on a Wednesday evening, and the first thing he said was, "It's ready." I was sitting at Louvenia's kitchen table again, same spot I'd been sitting in the night I first called him, except this time my hands weren't shaking around the phone. "The petition's drafted," he said. "Clean, straightforward, everything in order. I can file it whenever you give the word." "Then let's file it," I said. "Filing's the easy part," he told me. "Service is where people get this wrong. Once it's filed, we've got to get it into his hands the right way, properly documented, or the whole thing stalls out and drags for weeks while we chase him down." I asked him what that meant in practice. "It means I need a place and a time where I know for certain he'll be. Somewhere predictable. His home's an option, but people skip out, change locks, make it difficult on purpose once they sense it coming. A public setting's usually cleaner, faster, less room for him to dodge it." I sat with that a moment, turning it over slow. I wasn't looking for a stage. I wasn't building towards some moment I could savor. I'd spent 26 years watching my husband learn how to avoid conversations he didn't want to have, and I had no interest in spending another 6 weeks playing that same game with a process server instead of me. "There's actually a date already on the calendar that would work well for this," my attorney said. "You mentioned a closing, the real estate deal. Be ashamed to serve him at a moment like that, from a sentimental standpoint. But from a logistics standpoint, it's about as reliable as a location gets. He'll be there. Time and place, both confirmed weeks in advance." I didn't answer right away. Something in me wanted to feel guilty about it, wanted to ask whether that made me cruel, timing a man's undoing around the biggest day of his professional life. But the guilt didn't come, not really. What came instead was something quieter. A kind of tiredness at the thought of doing this any way that took longer than it needed to. "It's not about the moment," I told him, mostly to myself. "It's about not dragging this out." "That's exactly the read I had," he said. "Practical. not personal. Practical, I repeated. We talked through a few more details, how service would be handled, who would carry it out, what paperwork I'd need to sign on my end before anything moved forward. None of it required theatrics. None of it required me to raise my voice or explain myself to anybody, least of all Marvin. "I'll have it filed with the court first thing tomorrow morning," he said. "Once it's filed, it's real. There's no undoing it after that." "I understand." "You sound steady," he said, something like respect in his voice. "I am," I told him. And for the first time since the morning, Marvin came home talking about $250 million. I believed my own voice when I said it. The next morning, the petition was filed. Luvania went back out to Marvin's house a second time, not looking for trouble, just checking on her brother the way she'd done their whole lives. She found him at the kitchen table with papers spread out in front of him, rubbing his forehead the way their father used to when the bills came due before the money did. He didn't hide anything when she walked in, just waved her over, half venting before she'd even taken her coat off. "Look at this," he said, sliding a statement across the table. "Car lease, and this one's the renovation line." She scanned the numbers and said her stomach dropped somewhere around the third figure. "Marvin, this is a lot. It's an investment. Trisha wanted the house updated before everything closes. Money's coming. You co-signed this?" "Both of us signed it. It's both our names." She sat with that a second, because it wasn't what she'd expected to hear. She'd half hoped, she told me later, that she'd find something she could point at and say, "See, this is what she's doing to you." But that wasn't what was in front of her. 2 signatures, 2 names, a man who'd looked at numbers this size and decided, eyes open, that the future was already guaranteed enough to spend against. "The deal hasn't even closed yet. It's closing in a matter of days. What am I supposed to do? Wait around, not living my life? Wait until the money's in the bank before you spend money you don't have." He waved that off, the way he'd waved off everything since this started. "You've been against this from the beginning. Against her. Against how I'm living now." "I'm happy about the deal," she said. "I'm not happy watching you spend a fortune you haven't touched yet." He didn't answer that. Just gathered the statements back up like the conversation was over, which with Marvin, it usually was. She left that evening with a hollow feeling, not the anger she'd walked in with, closer to grief. The thing she'd been circling since her first uneasy visit wasn't really about Trisha. Not entirely. It was her brother, wide awake, making choices with his eyes open, and no warning was going to change the direction he was walking in. That night, sitting in her car outside her own house, she pulled out a notepad from her glove compartment and wrote down the numbers she remembered, the lease amount, the credit line, the dates. She didn't know exactly why she needed them written down. Just a feeling. The same one she'd been carrying for weeks, that somebody in this family needed to keep track of something even if nobody had asked her to. Marquis went back out to his father's house that week, just to drop off some mail that had gotten forwarded to his address by mistake. Nothing more than an errand. He didn't plan on staying, he told me, but Marvin waved him inside anyway, distracted, phone in one hand and a stack of paper in the other. "Can't talk long," Marvin said. "Got a contractor coming by about the kitchen?" "Another renovation?" "Trisha wants it done before we officially close. Says no point waiting once the money's basically guaranteed." Marquis said he didn't like the sound of basically guaranteed applied to $250 million that hadn't touched a bank account yet, but he kept that thought to himself. While Marvin took a call in the other room, Marquis waited near the kitchen, and that's when he heard Trisha on her own phone, tucked into the hallway, voice low, but not low enough. I know. It'll clear soon. I told you that," she was saying. "Once this closes, I can handle everything I owe, all of it, in one shot. Just hold off a little longer. They don't need to know anything yet." Marquis said he froze where he stood, pretending to study his phone, not wanting her to know he'd heard anything at all. She came back into the kitchen a minute later, smiling like nothing had happened, asking if he wanted something to drink. He said no, thank you, and left it there. He didn't know what debts she meant, didn't know who they were, didn't have anything solid enough to repeat to his father even if he'd wanted to. Just a handful of words caught through a hallway wall, easy enough to explain away if anybody asked her about them directly. Marvin came back into the kitchen a few minutes later, and Marquis said his father looked a little more tired than the last visit. A little more like a man carrying something heavier than he was letting on. "You all right, Dad?" "Fine. Just a lot going on before closing. Trisha wants to open another line for the kitchen. Cabinets, counters, the whole thing. I told her we should probably wait, but..." He stopped himself, shrugged. "She says it'll all even out once the deal's done. She's probably right." Marquis said he didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. And not long after, Marvin signed off on the third credit line right there at the kitchen table while his son sat close enough to see the pen move. He was getting ready to leave when Marvin's phone rang again, a different tone this time. One Marquis said made his father sit up straighter before he even answered it. "Yeah, this is Marvin Sutton," he said, and then a pause, his face shifting. "Wait, unusual activity on which line?" "No, that's supposed to be normal. Hold on, let me..." Marvin listened another moment, then his voice dropped. "Frozen? You can't just freeze it? I've got a contractor standing in my kitchen right now, waiting on a deposit." Marquis said the doorbell rang right then, the contractor letting himself be known through the window, and Marvin had to stand there, phone still to his ear, waving an apology through the glass, while the bank explained there was nothing that could be released until the account was reviewed. Marvin waved Marquis off, mouthing that he'd call him later, already pacing toward the hallway with the phone pressed hard to his ear, his voice climbing with a mix of confusion and something close to worry, while the contractor knocked a second time, unanswered. Marquis let himself out the side door without saying goodbye to Trisha. He called me from the driveway, told me everything, the hallway conversation, the third credit line, the frozen account, the contractor left standing on the porch. "Something's not right over there, Mama," he said. "I don't know what, but something's not right." I told him to be careful, and I meant it more than he understood. Marquis showed up at Louvenia's unannounced 2 days later, still carrying whatever he'd walked out of his father's house with. I was at the kitchen table folding laundry when he came in, and I watched him take me in. Really take me in. The way a worried child does when they're checking to see if a parent is holding together or just performing it. Whatever he was looking for, he didn't find it right away, because I saw something in his shoulders ease a little before he'd even said a word. "You look good, Mama," he said, sitting down across from me. "Better than I expected." "I'm doing all right." He studied me another moment. "You sure? Because I keep hearing things, seeing things, and everybody in this family's acting like it's normal, and I don't understand how you're just sitting here folding towels like nothing's happening." "Something's always happening, baby. Question is whether you let it run you or you run it. Are you planning something?" I kept folding, steady, and gave him a small smile instead of an answer. "I'm planning on getting through this the same way I've gotten through everything else. One day at a time." "That's not an answer. It's the answer I've got for you right now." He sat back, frustrated, and I could see the exact shape of what he was feeling. Caught in the middle, shut out on both sides, his father giving him rehearsed lines about grown decisions, and me giving him calm reassurance that told him nothing concrete either. I understood it wasn't fair to him, but some things a mother protects her child from until there's nothing left to protect him from. and I wasn't there yet. "I just don't want you carrying something alone," he said, softer now. "I'm not alone. I've got Luvania, I've got you checking on me, and I've got myself," which turns out to be more than I gave myself credit for. I reached over and squeezed his hand. "You don't have to worry the way you're worrying." Something in him settled at that, more from the steadiness in my voice than anything I'd actually told him. He didn't have the details, but he had enough. My hands not shaking, my voice not cracking, the way I looked him dead in the eye instead of away from him. And for my son, that ended up being enough to loosen the grip he'd been holding on to since Luvania first let it slip that I'd been put out. We sat a while longer, talking about smaller things, easier things, and I watched him breathe easier with every passing minute. "Oh, I almost forgot," he said, near the end of it, like it was an afterthought and not the reason for half his unease. "Dad's closing got moved up. He mentioned it when I was over there. Said it's happening sooner than they first planned." I kept my face even, kept folding. "Is that right?" I said. "Yeah. Guess it's coming up fast now." He shrugged, not thinking much of it. "Didn't even know deals could move like that." I already knew the date, had known it for days, but I let him tell me anyway, let him feel useful for having something to share, and said nothing that would tell him just how closely I'd already been counting down to it myself. Luvania went back a third time, and she told me she almost didn't. Said she was tired of being the sister nobody wanted to hear from. But something about that bank call Marquis had described kept nagging at her, so she went anyway. She found Marvin at the kitchen table again, except this time he wasn't half venting. He was fully unraveled, papers everywhere, his tie loosened like he'd been pulling at it for hours. "The bank flagged the new line," he said before she even sat down. "Said the spending pattern looked unusual. I had to spend 20 minutes proving it was really me on the account." "Marvin, I've been trying to tell you." "I know what you've been trying to tell me." He rubbed his face. "I remember the lease statement, the renovation line. You think I don't remember? Then why does it keep happening?" He didn't answer right away, and Luvania said that silence told her more than anything he could have said out loud. She reminded him, gently as she could manage, of the numbers she'd seen weeks back at that same table. The lease, the 2 lines after that, now flagged again for suspicious activity. And for the first time since any of this started, he didn't wave her off. He just sat there, looking older than she'd ever seen him look. "I'll talk to her," he said finally. He did. That same evening, according to what Marquis pieced together later from a conversation Marvin let slip in a weak moment. Marvin asked Trisha straight out why they kept needing more money before anything had cleared. She told him it was a necessary investment in their future together, that a man about to close a $250 million deal shouldn't be nickel and diming a kitchen renovation, that he was letting his family make him second-guess the life they were building. He didn't have a comeback for that, but something in him, quiet and unspoken, didn't sit right afterward. That night, lying awake beside her, he found himself running numbers in his head that had nothing to do with the deal. How long they'd actually known each other. How little he knew about her beyond what she'd told him. How fast all of it had moved. He didn't have words for the feeling yet. Just a low, steady unease he couldn't talk himself out of. The kind that sits behind the ribs and doesn't leave when the lights go off. Over the next few days, Trisha grew harder to reach. A text that used to get answered in minutes now sat for hours. A phone call that used to be picked up on the second ring rolled to voicemail, followed later by a message about work running long, or her sister needing her, or errands that kept multiplying. Nothing dramatic. Nothing anyone could point to and call wrong. Just a woman who used to be everywhere suddenly being somewhere else, a little more often than she used to be. Marvin didn't say much about it to anyone, but Marky noticed during a call that started about something else entirely that his father's voice had a flatness to it he hadn't heard before. Not anger, not suspicion exactly. Just the sound of a man doing quiet math he didn't like the answer to. Unsettled and needing something solid to hold on to, Marvin called Marshawn that night. "I just want to confirm we're still on track," he said. "Nothing's changed with the timeline, right?" Marshawn told him everything was moving as scheduled, nothing to worry about. Standard process all the way through to signing. Marvin thanked him and hung up, and for a moment, sitting alone in a house that no longer felt as sure of itself as it had a few weeks earlier, he let himself believe that the deal, at least, was the one thing he could still count on. He wasn't sure anymore he believed the same about anything else in that house. Winston's assistant called me down to his office first thing that morning, no explanation given over the phone, just a request to come as soon as I could. I knew before I sat down that it was about the closing. I'd been circling that date in my mind for days, and something in the tightness of his assistant's voice told me the waiting was over. "It's official," Winston said, sliding a memo across the desk. "Closing's confirmed for 3 days from now, and per policy, I need to walk you through what's required of you specifically." I read the memo slow, though I already understood most of what it would say. "Any disclosed related party on a deal above our compliance threshold has to appear in person at closing," he said. "Sign the final recertification, same table as everyone else. It's not a recommendation. It's policy, same as I told you back when we first reviewed the file." "I remember," I said. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly, not the professional answer, the real one." He folded his hands on the desk. "Are you comfortable being in that room? Given everything?" I thought about it a moment, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to give him one that was true and not just easy. "I'm not walking in there looking for anything," I said. "I'm walking in there because my job requires it. What happens after that, happens." "That's not really an answer to my question." "It's the honest one," I said. "I didn't ask for this timing. I didn't build this moment. It built itself, the way these things do when enough true things line up on the same calendar. I'm not going to pretend I'm sorry it landed this way. But I'm also not walking in there to make a scene. I'm walking in there to sign a form, same as I would on any other deal." Winston studied me a long moment, the way he always did when he was deciding whether to trust what I'd just told him. Whatever he saw in my face, it satisfied him, because he nodded slowly and moved on. "All right," he said. "Then here's where we are. Full compliance package still hasn't gone to Brooks' office. That happens closer to signing, same as I explained before. Standard sequencing, nothing unusual about the timing." "So, he doesn't know yet?" "Not yet. His side sees it when the final package goes out, day of, same as it would on any deal this size." I sat with that, feeling the shape of it settle into place. In 3 days, a man who hadn't looked closely at me in longer than I wanted to admit was going to open a folder and find my name sitting inside it, filed months before he ever knew there was anything to find. Not because I put it there to punish him, because it had always been there, doing exactly what it was supposed to do, waiting on a calendar neither of us had fully controlled. 3 days, I said, mostly to myself. 3 days, Winston confirmed. "You ready?" I gathered the memo, folded it once, and stood. "I've been ready longer than he knows," I said, and walked out of his office steady, the calm settling over me whole and complete for the first time since this all began. Marvin told Marquis most of this after the fact, in pieces, the way men do when they're still trying to make sense of something themselves. The call came from the bank again, this time about the third line, the kitchen renovation account. flagged for spending that outpaced what the account could reasonably support. Marvin sat with that news alone in the house for most of the afternoon, because Trisha, true to the pattern she'd settled into over the past several days, didn't answer when he called her about it. 2 hours passed before she walked through the door, breezy, unbothered, already talking about something else entirely before he could get a word out. "The bank called," he said, cutting her off. "Kitchen lines flagged too. Same as before." "It's probably nothing. Banks flag everything these days." "Trisha, where have you been all afternoon? I called you 4 times." "I told you. I had things to handle." She set her purse down, not quite meeting his eyes. "I can't be available every second, Marvin." "You used to be." The words came out harder than he meant them, and he said he saw something flicker across her face. Not hurt, exactly. More like a woman recalculating in real time. She crossed the kitchen and put her hand on his arm. Soft, her voice dropping into something warmer than anything she'd used all afternoon. "Baby, look at me. In a few days, none of this is going to matter. You're about to be a different kind of man, with a different kind of life, and I need you to trust that I'm building that with you, not against you. Don't let a little stress make you doubt us right when we're about to have everything." He said something in him wanted badly to believe her, wanted it enough that for a moment the bank call, the second line, all of it, felt small next to the warmth in her hand on his arm. What's that supposed to mean? It means the closer we get to this deal closing, the harder you are to find. And every time you do show up, it's asking me for more money before anything's even in the bank. "I'm not asking you for money. I'm asking you to trust that we're building something." "With whose money?" "Because right now, it's all mine. All borrowed. All against a deal that hasn't closed yet." She went quiet at that. And the quiet lasted long enough that Marvin said he felt something cold settle in his chest before she spoke again. "I have some things I need to clear up," she said finally. "Some debts. Nothing that concerns you." "Debts? What debts?" "It doesn't matter. Once this closes, I can handle everything, and none of it will matter anymore." Marvin said he stood there a long moment, turning her words over, and something Marquis had mentioned weeks earlier, a hallway conversation, half overheard, dismissed at the time as nothing, came back to him whole and clear for the first time. He didn't say that part out loud to her. He just looked at her differently than he had before. "This isn't about love for you, is it?" he said, quiet. "This is about the money clearing. That's not fair." "Isn't it?" She didn't answer that, and neither of them said much else the rest of the night. Marvin sat up long after she'd gone to bed, staring at the closing paperwork spread across the table, the numbers blurring the longer he looked at them. 2 days until signing. He told Marquis later that he'd never felt more alone heading into the biggest moment of his career, uncertain for the first time whether anything around him, the deal, the house, the woman asleep down the hall, was as solid as it had looked from the outside. I was in the small conference room down the hall when it happened, waiting the way Winston had told me to wait. And it was Winston himself who slipped in a few minutes later and told me everything, quiet and fast, so I'd know exactly what I was walking into. Marvin had arrived that morning with Marchand, both of them in good suits, both of them expecting nothing more than signatures and handshakes. Winston said Marvin looked lighter than he had in weeks, like the stress of the last few days had lifted the moment he walked through those doors, certain the hardest part was already behind him. Marchand laid the closing packet out across the table, working through it page by page the way he always did before a signature this size, not rushing, not skipping steps. A man who took his final review seriously, no matter how many times he'd done it before. Winston said everything moved smooth for the first several pages. Then Marchand's hand stopped, He sat with one page a long moment, reading it twice, Winston said, before he looked up at Marvin with the expression that wasn't quite confusion yet, more like a man checking his own understanding before he trusted it. "Marvin," he said, "this disclosure, the related party filing, it's got your wife's name on it." Marvin laughed. Winston told me, actually laughed, like it had to be some clerical mix-up. "My wife doesn't work in real estate development, man. She's in, I don't even know exactly what she does, corporate something. She's not connected to this." "According to this, she is," Marchand said, sliding the page toward him. "Senior Vice President of Business Development, filed 8 months ago. Says here she recommended your company for the shortlist." Winston said Marvin's laugh didn't finish. It just stopped, mid-breath, and something in his face went still in a way Winston said he'd never seen on a man before. Not shock exactly, something underneath shock, like the floor shifting beneath a house that had looked steady from the outside for years. "That's not possible," Marvin said, but Winston said his voice had already lost whatever certainty it started with. Marchand pushed the folder fully open now, laying out page after page. The original disclosure, the recusal filing, her signature dated months before Marvin had ever heard the word shortlist applied to his own company. "Did you know your wife worked on this deal?" Marchand asked him, direct, no longer just confused, now searching Marvin's face for an answer he clearly didn't have. Marvin didn't say anything. Winston said he just stared down at the page, at her name printed clean and official above a title he'd never once asked her about, in 26 years of marriage, at a date that sat there proving she'd been carrying this deal, and by extension, carrying him, long before he'd ever thought to throw her away. He picked the file up himself then, Winston said, hands not quite steady, reading it start to finish like a man looking for an exit that wasn't there. And when he finally looked up from the last page, Winston said his face had gone the color of a man realizing the ground he'd been standing on had never fully been his own. Winston finished telling me all of this in a hush, glancing at the clock, and I understood exactly what it meant. It was time. I stood, smoothed my jacket, and walked toward the door. It opened before I reached it. I walked into that room and every eye turned toward me at once, but I only had eyes for one man. Marvin sat frozen at the head of the table, the disclosure still open in front of him, his hand resting on a pen he hadn't managed to lift in several minutes. I'd learn later that a process server had found him that same morning, hours before he ever walked into this building, and handed him papers he'd read once, standing in his own driveway, before folding them into his jacket pocket and trying to convince himself he could get through the day before dealing with what they meant. He hadn't gotten through the day. I could see that the moment I stepped through the door. "Charletta." My name came out of him broken, barely a whisper, like he wasn't sure it was really me standing there. I didn't answer him yet. I walked to the table, calm, my heels the only sound in a room that had gone completely still, and I felt Marchand's eyes on me, and Winston's, and the eyes of men I'd never met who had no idea what they were witnessing. 26 years had led to this exact room, this exact table. And not once on the drive over had my hands shaken the way his were shaking now. "Charletta, wait." Marvin pushed back from his chair, half rising, reaching toward me with a hand that was shaking. "Everything's on the line here. Everything. If this falls apart." I let him get that far, and no further. I leaned in close enough that only he could hear it, and I whispered the 4 words that had been sitting in my chest for weeks. "Not on my watch." I didn't raise my voice to say them. I didn't need to. They landed in that room the way a door closes, final, without slamming, without needing to be loud to be heard. He opened his mouth again, but nothing came out. 26 years of marriage. And in that moment, I watched every word he might have reached for die somewhere behind his eyes before it ever made it to his throat. He had called my energy heavy once, standing in our kitchen, sure of himself in a way he would never be sure of anything again. I thought of that now, watching him fold in on himself in front of strangers, and felt nothing close to triumph. Just the quiet of a debt, finally settled. I reached into my bag and set my own copy of the petition on top of the closing documents in front of him, the pages he'd already been served that morning now staring back at him from a second direction. Confirmed, undeniable, arrived from two places in the same day. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to explain what it was. He already knew. Behind me, one of the investment committee members, a man I only knew by name from the file, spoke low to Marchand, not bothering to lower his voice enough that the room couldn't hear it. A man who moves a mistress in the same day he puts his wife out over a business win. That's not stability. That's a liability we're only now seeing on paper. He wasn't asking a question. He was closing a file in his mind before he ever closed it on paper. I turned and walked out of that room the same way I'd walked out of our driveway weeks before, steady, dry-eyed, carrying nothing I hadn't already made peace with. Behind me, I heard Marchand's voice asking Marvin something about how he wanted to proceed, and I didn't wait around to hear whether he had an answer or whether there was still a deal left to answer for. Weeks later, once the financing had been pulled and the last of what Marvin owned had gone to cover what he and Tricia had spent against money that never came, Marquis told me about the final conversation he witnessed between them, standing in a driveway that no longer had a house attached to it worth fighting over. "You chased away the only smart thing you ever had," Tricia told him, cold, already halfway to her car. "I hope whatever's left of you was worth it." She didn't wait for an answer. She got in her car and drove off, and Marvin stood there alone in an empty driveway, finally understanding, far too late, exactly what he'd thrown away, exactly what he'd let take its place, and exactly what a man's judgment costs him when the people watching him decide they've seen enough.